So we are at the Pottery Mall in Red Wing, Minnesota. And you know, we have covered a railroad. We've covered the Milwaukee Road, the Midland, the Minneapolis and St. Louis, and we've covered the Chicago Great Western, heading west out of town, but we've never really covered the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern, and that's what we're going to do today. I've got some information I'll share with you. We've got some great pictures, and I think you're going to enjoy this. It's a lot of good history. So I think first we have to start with a couple of people. I'm going to go back to the beginning. We're talking about the Red Wing and Iowa Railway. How many people have even heard of that? And that goes back to Silas Buck Foote, S.B. Foote, and he has a tannery in town. And he has this, excuse me, he has this great idea to build a railroad in the Midwest and tap into all of the agriculture and mining that's going on, you know? I mean, there's a lot of it going on back then. 1881, it shows him as being the president of that company. So I think that company was started by him. That was his dream. And if we go back to that 1881, you're talking about the wheat capital of Minnesota, the wheat capital of the world. I mean, everything was wheat in this area, and it was an excellent producer. So people were moving wheat around, grain. You know, they had to bring it to the towns in their wagons, and you know, it was quite a trip if you lived in Zumbrota and you were heading to Red Wing, or vice versa. So that was his dream. And he started that company, the Red Wing and Iowa Railway. That was incorporated in 1881. Now, nothing was done with that. I don't know. I looked back in the history, and all I found was that nothing more was done with that railroad because of the competition. And you have to think, well, yeah, it was pretty competitive back then, and we're talking an era where all these railroads are getting started. So 1886 comes along, and the Red Wing and Iowa Railway is reorganized into the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern. So this is also a time where we see the name T.B. Sheldon being mentioned when this reorganization happened. Now, I found bits and pieces of history. You don't find one great big thing. You have to scour the internet, look at history books and all of that. And I found T.B. Sheldon listed as the president of the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern at one time, and also as the treasurer. Now, maybe S.B. Foote was president at one time. I don't know how that all worked. But I do know that, you know, Sheldon was a president, found it written, and he was a treasurer at one time. So Sheldon, he's into grain. He's into grain because we're getting back to the wheat again, okay? So now we're talking elevators and mills, and he's also president of a couple of banks. So this guy knows what he's doing here, okay? And it's all being reorganized, and finally, in 1888, they start grading the railroad from Red Wing to Zumbrota. And later that year, they start laying track, but winter sets in, and they stop for a while. They pick up in the spring, and in 1889, the railroad is completed from Red Wing to Zumbrota. Also, in 1888, we see another name in the picture, That's right. Now this one I could probably tell you a whole lot of information about. And that's Lucius Hubbard. That's right. He lived in Red Wing. This gentleman was a private in the Union Army in the Civil War with the 5th Minnesota. And he worked his way up to colonel. That's, you know, private to colonel. That's a great big difference, right? So he winds up being colonel by the time the end of the Civil War comes, and he winds up getting into politics, and he's a senator. And between 1882 and 1887, he's the governor of Minnesota. And he lives in Red Wing, okay? So, okay, now we've got somebody involved with this railroad that he can pull some strings. He knows a lot of people, right? He was governor. He was governor till 1887, and here in 1888, 1889, he's getting involved with this railroad. And he's a promoter. That's what he is. He's in this, and he's promoting the railroad. So you can imagine the amount of people that he knows that he can get involved with this railroad to make this railroad happen. And I just think that's so interesting. And if you follow his history now in Red Wing, if you lived in Red Wing, you may have heard of his home. And his home wound up being St. John's Hospital. The hospital moved into his house, and then they kept building addition after addition, and before you know it, his house was surrounded by the hospital. And if you walked into that hospital, the only thing you'd know that resembled his house was the mantle on the fireplace. Yeah, so see how history's intermingling with these three guys. So you needed to know these three guys in order to know the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern. Now I know there was a lot of other employees involved, but these are the three key guys that got this railroad going. Now if we go back into history a little bit further, we find that T.B. Sheldon actually owned a railroad construction company. Yeah, we don't see a name for that company, but it says he had one. So it makes you wonder if it was his construction company that built the railroad. Could have been. Never know. History's secrets, right? But we do know that Sheldon, you know, being that banker, looking at all the possibilities of everything, he saw time to make some money, you know. So he bought 30 acres in two of the railroad towns that were going to be having the railroad go through. He bought 30 acres, and he split those up into 100, I think it was 106 lots. So he sold the lots. And when we talk about Goodhue, he wound up building the depot in Goodhue, and then sometime after it was built, he sold it to the railroad company. So that's just awesome history. Awesome history. So when the railroad began in 1888, you're talking railroad camps. Now I'm sure there probably was a camp in Red Wing and maybe in Zumbrota, and they move. They move. Railroad camps moved back in the day. They'd build so many miles of rail, and then they'd stop and they'd move to camp. So many miles of rail, stop and move to camp. So we're talking about a book here now that was written by Margaret E. Hutchinson in 1989. And she says the work began in the summer of '88 with 600 men and 500 teams of horses preparing the railroad bed from Red Wing to Zumbrota. It was estimated that 70,000 ties would be needed. Red Wing to Zumbrota, how many miles is that? I don't know, I'm gonna guess at 27 miles maybe? I could be wrong, but 70,000 ties. So now we've got 70,000 ties being brought in from someplace. And the railroad started here in Red Wing and worked its way to Zumbrota. So I'm thinking everything came into Red Wing and then moved west. That's just unbelievable. And that camp would have been, if you were driving, you know, towards Zumbrota in Goodhue, that camp would have been, you'll see a gas station there on the right, and just after you pass that gas station on the right, that's where that camp was. I mean, wow, can you imagine that? 600 men, how many tents is that? Yeah, and shanties, you know, because they built shanties too. These were regular towns, these camps were. I mean, wow. She also writes that work stopped for the winter and the track was finished in Zumbrota on May 3rd, 1889. The first train went all the way to Rochester was on May 7th. Cool stuff, hey? Yeah. Just love this. Just love it. Anyway, I do have a timeline here we'll get back to. So in 86, it's reorganized to the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern. In 88, the grading began. In 89, the railroad's finished. Also in 89, Sheldon builds that depot, and you know what? He could have built the one in Zumbrota as well, because that was an early depot, and there's still some I question about the real date that was built. So that could have been for the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern too. In 1891, the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern was subsumed into the Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Pacific Railroad. Now, that was under control of the Chicago Great Western. So we have the Chicago Great Western owned the Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Pacific, and then they bought the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern, but rather than throwing it into the Chicago Great Western, they threw it into another company that they owned, but the name never changed. The name never changed. You'll see the same name on the engines and everything until they decided to bring these companies totally into the Chicago Great Western, and that's when they changed the name. So the names on these railroad engines and that would stay the same for the next 5 or 6 years before everything turned into one company under the Chicago Great Western. So that's pretty cool. In 1892, now we're getting into this, in 1892, a branch line was built into Claybank to meet the demands of the clay. So that's 1892. So, who owns the railroad in 1892? Chicago Great Western, but it's under the name of the Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Pacific, but it's still its own company. So it's still the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern, but after you go through the other railroad, it's owned by the Chicago Great Western. And this line remains open and servicing from Red Wing to Zumbrota until 1965, and that's when the service ends. When you talk about the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern, this was their dream when they reorganized this. They wanted to make a company that was going to go up to Duluth, it was going to go out west, and the only part of this railroad that was ever realized was from Red Wing to Zumbrota. That's the only tracks that were ever laid for that company. So here's Pottery Place, and this end of the building is the first section that was built right about to where you see this pulpit on the roof here. From that over this way, that's your first section. That's the building that's going to be in this picture that I'm going to put up. And I want you to note this chimney, because you see this chimney is in the building right now. That chimney is in this picture, but it is outside the building. And no, they did not move the chimney. They built an addition around it, and the addition just keeps going all the way down that way, in that direction. So you'll see that chimney. You'll see this building right over here in that photo. I'm gonna go place myself to get a better angle here. Actually, this building here is in my way, so I'll do the best I can. And then once I get over there, I'm going to put up a couple notes. I'm gonna show you where a couple of buildings are on the picture. And I want you to keep an eye on those buildings, because the next two photos I put up after that are of the locomotive, and you'll see exactly where that was taken in this complex. Well, I want to make sure I have that chimney in this picture. Okay, I'm going to fade this picture right now. Okay, I have one more, and this is showing you the clay cars. And this, look at the clay cars, because they say Chicago Great Western. So you can see that they had clay cars too after they had bought out the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern. So what do you think of those pictures? Pretty good, hey? That's right, I love history. Anyway, the towns that the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern serviced was Red Wing, Hay Creek, Claybank, Goodhue, White Willow, and Zumbrota. And I know we've been to a lot of these places already. We've seen where the Duluth, Red Wing, and Southern had built their covered bridge in Zumbrota. So I'm not going to bring you out there again. You know, I'm not going to bring you to Goodhue and show you that depot, because we've been there before. So if you want to see those, you can always go back into the videos and find one. But I am going to bring you to Claybank, so that's where we're going next. We're going to go to Claybank and then out to the clay pits. So I'll meet you in Claybank. Okay, so we are in Claybank. Once again, watch yourself when you cross the streets. This is a busy downtown area. Actually, this is one of Goodhue County's ghost town sites. So I'll show you where the railroad went through, and I'll hook you up with another photo. Okay, so here's our former site of Claybank. That's because it no longer has a post office. And I think this is County 52, if I remember right. And here is a mile marker. Mile marker 105. See that? Right there. And then there's a sign down in there. You can see it. This is this railroad line still belongs to the DNR, Minnesota DNR. So this would be where our railroad came through, and I believe it was on this side. I think it was right in here. You can see that tree line back there. I think that's on the railroad bed. And this would be coming from Hay Creek and going out this way right in here, crossing through Clay Bank, and then I think about a quarter of a mile out that way. And this is all private land again, but you can see there's probably a cutout there somewhere. But that would be the old railroad bed. And that would be heading towards Goodhue. But about a quarter mile out, it's going to turn and it's going to go out towards the clay pits. So when we leave here, I'll put up a map so you can see where we're going next. Okay, here you go. Right here, there's an old railroad car being used as the depot in this photo, next to the general store. It's right now. Okay, I'm going to drive out where we can see a railroad cut in the field, and I'll put up a map now that'll show where Clay Bank is, and it'll also show the spur going out towards the clay pits, and then it splits into two spurs. And I'll show you what we can find out that way. So I'll put up the map now, and I'll meet you at the next place I'm. So I'm on 205th Avenue, and you can see the cut out there, the railroad cut in the field. See it? That's it out there. And it's already made its split from the main line, probably out there behind that hill. Out there somewhere is where it made its split. Let's see if we can catch it again here. There it is. See that? That's that railroad cut. I'll go down and get another view so you can see it. Okay, one more look. See it? See how that's cut out back there? That's your railroad cut out. Yep. Okay, so that intersection there is 350th Street and Highway 58. That's 58 where that truck is. Across the street was clay pits. Across this street, clay pits. Back in this area here, clay pits. Down in there, clay pits. That's right. And this is a history site. This is a history marker right here. And I'll see if I can let you have a read at this. I know it's pretty scratched up. It needs a little of attention. I don't know who takes care of this stuff, but this shouldn't be that hard to fix, you wouldn't think. So you can stop the video if you want and read this. This is John Paul. He's the one that founded these clay pits. Okay, I'm going to drive down 350th Street a bit. Now, I made a video of this whole area for the Adventures of Mr. and Mrs. B YouTube page. And that was years ago, and there was actually a sign here that said John Paul's Clay Pits. And if I remember that sign, there it is. There it is. I'll stop and I'll take a little. Okay, I stopped and parked. You know, years ago when I was in here, none of this was here. In fact, this was a great big, like a ditch. It was part of the pits, you know. And looks like someone's filling it in with stuff, but I caught this from the truck. It's still here. There you go. See the sign? John Paul Pottery Site, 1862 to 1872. Yep. So that's the first fellow that was here. I think that's so cool. So I don't think this is the rail bed up there, but it's a good place to give you an idea how this worked. So this goes back to when the days they were digging this all out with shovels even. So picture some guys down here in this pit, and they're digging out the clay, and they have their clay cars loaded with clay, and they have a rail system that's going to go up the top of that hill and dump it into a rail car that's sitting up there. That's what you've got to imagine here. Okay, so I'm going to plug in this picture right now. All right, this is 215th Avenue, and I just wanted to kind of end the video here. See how dusty it is. This whole area is clay pits. Both sides of the street. Yep. Had to pull over. So that kind of ends this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll put up 3 more videos. One up here. Where is it? One up here. One over here. One down over here. And those are the links to other videos that will be Duluth Red Wing and Southern orientated. So I'll catch you on my next one. God bless you all.